Welcome to the Uncut podcast. I'm Pastor Luke.
And I'm Pastor Cameron.
And this is the Uncut podcast, where we have honest, uncut conversations about faith, life, and ministry.
Sponsored by Jocko again this week.
Yep.
I'm going to see Jocko in just a few months. So I'm going to tell him that I drink his energy drinks on my podcast all the time and he should sponsor us.
You going to tell him what the podcast is about?
I will.
Yeah.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What is the podcast about today, Cameron?
Today, I thought we'd talk a little bit about marriage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Been studying a lot about marriage lately. Been thinking a lot about marriage lately. We have a marriage conference coming up here at Conduit.
We do.
The weekend of October 19th, 19th and 20th. It's going to be a Friday evening and then an all-day Saturday.
Yep.
It's going to be, I'm believing it to be a great experience for married and engaged couples as well. So if that's something that interests you, mark it on your calendar now, and there'll be more details coming out here as we get closer to October. But anyway, I'm also studying a lot about marriage this week.
Yeah.
Been thinking a lot about marriage this year, both because of the marriage conference and because this year Sherry and I have been married 20 years.
Wow.
Which feels to me like a milestone.
Yeah.
I know sometimes it's like the 25-year anniversary and the 50-year anniversary.
Sure.
Like my in-laws just had their 50-year anniversary this past weekend. So we celebrated that with them. But I think what we learn about marriage is also a lot about what we learn about ourselves. And so I thought, there's enough collective wisdom about marriage that we can talk about it, I think, or at least talk about perspectives. And I think that what I really like is your perspective.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Because, there is sometimes it's difficult for people who have been married a while to remember what it's like to be married a short period of time. And I would say, you guys, this will be your second anniversary coming up.
Yep.
So 2-year anniversary this summer.
1.5 years and some change. Yeah.
Yep. We're not this summer, but this fall.
Yep.
And so I think similar to what we did when you came to work here, and we're like, I wanted to grab onto your newness of being here.
Yes.
To tell us the things about Conduit and about the ministry that we had become blind to, because of our proximity to it. I think that there's value also in asking you some of your reflections on marriage in the first few years.
Yeah.
For those who are maybe hoping to get married or are engaged to be married now, or who are newly married, and to just try and get a sense of all right, how do we talk about marriage? What are the things that we want to talk about in marriage? Yeah. What are the things that are important? Thought we would just jump off into the deep end.
Let's do it.
Jump off into the deep end there. I also, I've done a fair bit of both premarital counseling and marriage counseling, or counseling for married couples. And kind of without fail, there are a few issues that are the issues.
Yep.
Really is. So if you had to guess, at least from my experience in counseling with these couples, is what would be the issues married couples face that motivate them to get an outside perspective, motivate them to come and see me or come and see someone else who can help them process through their things.
Yeah. Money, like money differences, sex, expectations around like roles inside of the family, like and like children, parenting, when to have kids, and yeah, those would probably be like. I'm just kind of going off the list of what like I know you talk about in your premarital counseling, and also what I know is like included in every premarital counseling book. Yeah. Those are typically the ones that like that people get hung up on because they're big. And everybody has thoughts about them, but they maybe don't realize they have thoughts or opinions about them. Yeah. And so, and the hard thing too is that when you decide to get engaged, you almost immediately start making financial decisions together, whether or not you've actually talked through.
You have the same values about your resources.
Exactly. And so you're immediately in this place of, oh, well, we're going to get a venue and a photographer and we're going to, or are we going to put a down payment on a house? And you start making all these financial decisions together. Yeah. And you may have not talked through how to integrate your finances yet. And you start doing it in practicum, and then you run into like, wait, is this our money? Is it my money? Is it your money? Like all of those questions.
I think what I found is that like, while like the conversation about finances is an important one, I think it is even broader than finances. I think it comes down to, how did I say it? It's like determining your like the lifestyle that each individual values. Yep. You know, because generally everyone has the same like finance questions or questions about finances. If you just talk about like people are going to have the right answers for finances. You can't spend more than you make. You need to save for retirement. You should have a budget and, you know, everything like that. But what happens is that like, I'm only like 50% a Dave Ramsey subscriber. But, you know, one of the things that he says, and I agree with, is that dealing with finances is like 10% knowledge, what to do, and 90% behavior. Yeah, the willingness to do what you need to do with what you know. And so when it comes to the conversation around finances with couples, it's more about like, okay, what type of lifestyle do each of you value? And that usually gets into conversations around like, there's, you know, someone's a spender or someone's a saver. Yeah. Or someone values this type of vacation or that type of vacation, or someone values this type of home or that type of home. Yep. Or someone values
the flexibility to make incidental purchases.
Right. Yeah. Right. Or someone values, you know, one of the partners staying at home to raise a family or to take care, or the other partner they both want to work, and like, so it then becomes like a what type of lifestyle rather than necessarily like how are you going to build a budget together. It's part of it. Yep. But the conversation is much bigger. It has a lot more, I guess, like tributaries to it than just dollars and cents.
Yeah. It certainly does.
Yeah. But you're right in a lot of ways about the things that I feel like tend to be categories that people want to talk about or need to talk about. The expectations, is a big one. Yep. Like we carry expectations into every relationship that we have. I have expectations for you, and you have expectations of me, both as friends and as colleagues, and all of that. And you have expectations for your wife, and she has expectations of you, and I've got them for my wife, and she has them for me. And the question is not whether or not we have expectations of the other person in our relationship with them. It's whether or not those expectations are clear and have been communicated.
Yeah.
And why would you say it's important to clearly communicate our expectations that we have in any relationship with people?
Well, I think it's because that's what's the quote? Unspoken expectations are is a recipe for disappointment or something like that. Or disappointment is just unspoken expectations. It's funny. I had a professor who would occasionally, he was also a pastor in the community, and so he would occasionally do premarital counseling for some of the students and things like that. Which he's more of a I've always thought of him as more of a preacher and less of a pastor shepherd. But from someone who went through his premarital counseling, I heard that one of the questions that he would kind of bring this up in this kind of way of saying, so do you just squeeze the toothpaste or do you roll the toothpaste tube?
Okay.
and his whole idea is just that are you going to share toothpaste tubes? Are you guys going to have your own toothpaste? Is it going to bug you when you come in and your wife is just kind of randomly squeeze the toothpaste tube and when you prefer to roll it or whatever? I think it's somewhat ridiculous that he goes down into that kind of granularity.
Yeah, it definitely is.
But
there is some value in it.
There's some value into it. And his point being is just simply is that what are your expectations around toothpaste?
Well, there's things that and here's how I talk about it is that we all kind of enter into marriage with a picture in our mind of what it's going to be like.
Yeah.
How we're going to live together, how we're going to spend our time, what our home is going to be like, all of that. And we almost always create the idyllic image.
Of course.
Why would we create the disappointing image?
No.
So we almost always create the idyllic image. And then if you don't have someone that helps you express those expectations pre-marriage, you carry those in with you. And then what happens? Well, she rolls the toothpaste instead of squeezes it. And the idyllic image of what it meant to live together in holy matrimony comes crumbling down. The whole house of cards falls on the toothpaste.
Yeah.
And then you're left either having to say something or you don't say anything because you realize how silly it is. But that doesn't eliminate that thing that's in your heart, that expectation that's in your heart. And so unspoken expectations that then get broken by the people we love.
Yep.
And then we don't communicate and compromise on our expectations for the other.
Yep.
End up becoming seeds of resentment that lead to roots of bitterness.
Yep.
And so when we have things that we don't communicate as expectations and then they get broken, it creates gaps. Yeah. And those gaps get filled with resentment and bitterness, which is never the place that we want our the most intimate of our relationships to be.
Yeah. Well, I heard it said that resentment, if you notice resentment in yourself, it's probably because they are behaving in a way in which you do not feel permission to behave yourself. And I found that to be, it's not like that's not the root of all resentment, but it's a root of a lot of it, I think, particularly for couples. If one of us has a value of, well, say, we'll stick with the money one, for example. Say we're not allowed to make any purchases above $100 without like, or as far as like pre-approved purchases, right?
Yeah.
Non-budgeted expense. You can make it a non-budgeted expense as long as it's under $100 or something like that. Anything above that, I would never purchase something that's $150, $200, $300 without first making sure my wife is okay with it. But then if she were to not hold that rule or expectation that's invisible inside of my head, and then she goes and does that, resentment could come out of it. Mm-hmm. And you'd be like, oh, I'm so mad that she bought that thing. Mm-hmm. And you're angry. Why? Because she behaved in a way that you felt you couldn't or shouldn't because of certain value or conviction you held. Mm-hmm. And then you're in that place of, what do you do? Do you communicate it? Do you just roll over it? Do you not say anything? Does it build into bitterness over time?
Yep.
And that's where it is. And it's because, and this is one of the things, this is not wisdom from me. I've heard this from other places, I think. But that like, it's easy, I think, particularly in like the quote unquote honeymoon stages, to just be like, oh, it's not a big deal. Right. But you're just getting close to your 20 year. I'm at a year and a half. Mm-hmm. Is the thing that is not a big deal a year and a half in going to be how big of a deal is it going to be 20 years in?
Yeah. It won't be the thing anymore, mm-hmm. but it will be the thing. It will be the seed that created the root, mm-hmm. that grew the tree, that now is shading the entire marriage.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And there's 1,000 other things in the branches of that tree.
Yep.
Now, and it really is not even about that thing anymore.
No.
It's about, it comes down to probably the main thing-ish with all of healthy marriages is the ability to effectively and healthily communicate.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it becomes like, if we can't communicate how an expectation is not met mm-hmm. in our heart, and it just sits there, mm-hmm. then there can never be any, like, it can only turn into resentment.
Yeah.
It can only turn into bitterness. But we have to be willing to say something, mm-hmm. and that talk has to at some point be in a healthy way, because we can communicate very aggressively, mm-hmm. very abusively, very, very poorly, like we can communicate with our non-communication.
Yeah. Right.
The silent treatment is communication,
Yeah.
And so, the thing about the whole question that I started with is that you're right, though all of those issues you do usually come up. It's usually, I start really every marriage counseling session and premarital session with kind of getting a sense of, like, really it's more premarital than not, but is to get a sense of, one, like, what is a person's view on marriage? Mm-hmm. Like, what are the things that they are carrying into this relationship?
Yeah.
That will inform their perspective on marriage.
Yep.
And that's usually like tell me the marriages that you saw growing up.
Yeah.
Your parents' marriage and how you felt about them. Yeah. How they affected you, both negative and positive, because mm-hmm. not everyone has just negative views of marriage. Some people have super, super positive examples of marriage in their life, and they want to take those examples and carry the lessons that they've learned into their own marriage. And some people are like the complete opposite, and most people are a little bit of both. Not everyone's parents' marriages is the marriage that they talk about. Sometimes it's their grandparents, sometimes it's their friends or an aunt and uncle or an older sibling or whatever. But what kind of stuff are you bringing into your perspective on marriage? We're like, okay, so let's to get separately as two individual people, let's describe. Writing it down, let's describe our view of an idyllic marriage. The marriage that we want to create, the marriage that's in our head, the marriage that we've dreamed of, the marriage of, that we've always wanted, avoiding the things that we saw growing up that we don't want, adding in the things that we do want, right? And let's do it around these general categories.
Yep.
Let's do it around household responsibilities and kind of like how we're going to do life together, the practicalities. Let's do it around lifestyle and value, like this value of our lifestyle and finances and that kind of stuff. Let's describe how we're going to think about our sexual relationship, the frequency, what is allowed, what's not allowed, who we're going to talk to about it, who we're not going to talk to about it, all of those things. Family of origin type of things. How are we each going to interact with our families now that we're married?
Yeah, right.
And as individuals, how are we going to interact with our families once we're married?
Right. Are we going to allow the classic mother-in-law dynamics to play out? Are we whose family are we going to for Thanksgiving and Christmas? Like all of those things.
Yep. Which ends up being usually a pretty big one for people.
Yeah.
And then what was the last one? Obviously like faith, spirituality, like how are we going to live together in, integrating our individual walks with Jesus. And so, okay, then now make a list of, as far as those categories are concerned, all of the idyllic things that you can imagine about what your marriage is going to be. Don't share them with each other. So you make them separately. Next session, we're going to come in together, and I want to watch the dynamic of you communicating your heart to the other. So you watch them communicate it, right? And then you give the other person the opportunity to respond to what has been said.
Right.
And so the whole of the exercise is the ability to articulate what I want, the ability of the other to hear what I've said, to interpret it inside their own head and say it back. So to interact with it, because sometimes the expectations that one person has of a marriage are unrealistic.
Right.
Not everything that's idyllic is reality.
Right.
Kind of a classic example would be someone who writes down the expectation. I have an expectation that we are going to have sex 7 times a week.
Right.
While we're married.
Unrealistic. For most people. Right? Unless both people are saying like, that's the reality. That's what we want. That's what you want.
Oh, okay.
Good for you.
Right. But it's probably unrealistic.
It's on one side of the bell curve.
Correct.
Right. It's not the average.
Right. So what do we do now as the person who didn't write that, who thinks, oh my gosh, I can't live up to that expectation.
Right.
What do we do? Do we hold those thoughts in our heart in fear?
Or do we
say, I think that's an unrealistic expectation. Can we find some kind of compromise? Right. And it's in those moments where we learn to speak and we work together to find the compromise, or I learn why the other person feels like 7 days a week is important to them.
Right.
So now I get to become curious about why would that be something? Tell me why that's important to you.
Right.
And that whole conversation brings just like
Yeah.
a flood of information.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, is that it's rarely, like you said, it's rarely the thing, right? Like if it's, I feel like sex is a big one, and sex is always something other than just sex. Usually there's usually layers to it, right? It's not just about the thing itself. There's emotional components to our sexuality that some of us are aware of, some of us are completely oblivious to, but they're there. And they impact the thoughts we have about that. And the same goes to just about everything, right? There's these values and these desires or needs, or there's a story, right? Like, well, my expectation is that, I don't know, dinner's on the table every single night. But my expectation is also that I will be home every night for dinner.
Exactly.
Right? Well, what's the story behind that?
Right.
Well, my dad never came home, and he wasn't home every night.
Right.
And my mom, was, whatever. Like, there's some sort of story behind that as to why that's formulated as an expectation. It's got to do with family of origin or a family they saw, and they're like, my family wasn't like that, but I saw a family like that, and I saw how connected they were. And so now I've tied that to the husband comes home every day and they have a meal together that the wife has cooked. And I want not just that, I want what that results in my mind as well. And so when you get to that, you're like, oh, well, we can achieve that a number of different ways. And it doesn't have to be that I cook a meal for us every single night. And all of a sudden the field of play is open much wider than it was before.
Correct. It's almost never the thing that's the thing.
Right.
There's something behind it. And sometimes it's a big thing. Sometimes it's a relatively small thing. But the goal there is not even really necessarily to get all of the expectations out in the open right then and there. The goal is to help them see how to communicate regularly, how to do that. So.
I'll share this one because I shared this in a sermon, so this one's already been it's already been
it's already out on the internet.
It's already out on the internet. But this is it's a super silly example. But we've got mats in the bathroom, right? And there's this mat between our toilet, kind of faces the shower, and there's this square mat, and I'm like, well, that mat is for when you get out of the shower and you're drying off, and so it needs to be close to the shower so that when you get off. And every time I'd go into the bathroom, I kind of noticed that it kind of scooched over closer to the toilet, and so I'd kind of scooch it back. Well, that went on for about over a year, and then finally my wife said, Luke, are we going to talk about the fact that you keep moving the stupid mat in the bathroom? And I was like, what are you talking about? You keep moving it. And she was just like, well, and I had no idea that there was this silent war between us over where this mat belonged in the bathroom. And she was like, I thought you just weren't saying anything. I was like, I didn't know I wasn't, or I didn't know that you weren't. We were just yeah. And so it was immedately humorous because we were both just like, oh. So now it's equidistant.
Just need a big one.
Or yeah. But anyways, you just gotta talk about it though.
Yeah.
And have a way to talk about it, because
you make when you don't talk, then you make assumptions about what the other person is.
Right.
Their motivations, their decisions.
Right.
And we almost never, it's very rare that we make assumptions in the best direction.
No.
We almost always make assumptions in the worst. We create a negative narrative in our mind when we make assumptions, not a positive one.
Right. We become mind readers.
Right.
But we're really bad at it because we actually can't read people's minds.
Correct. So the act of communication just actually, it removes assumption from the equation and allows us to actually engage with reality, which is usually a lot more gentle and benign than we originally thought it was.
Yep.
So
Yeah, because I just thought the mat kept moving.
Yeah. I mean, I've shared a similar story from our first year of marriage about how, one of Sherry's kind of unspoken expectations of me. And it was like, I remember it as being like our first kind of fight as a married couple. We don't really fight. We don't fight. Our first disagreement as a married couple was kind of the unspoken expectation that I would take the garbage out when it was full.
Yep.
Without being asked.
We had the same thing.
Yeah, without being asked.
Yeah.
I would just notice that it was full and take it out without being asked. I have no problem taking the garbage out. I like totally fine with me. I don't not an issue at all.
Yep.
My issue with what was just like okay, well, if you want me to take the garbage out and I haven't yet, all you need to do is say, could you please take the garbage out? But she wanted me to take it out before she had to ask. She wanted me to notice.
Yep.
And I think what it comes down to is like what is the implicit expectation underneath all of that?
Yeah.
Is that she wanted me to have like some perceptive intentionality about what needed done in the house, the household chores, the things that needed done for cleaning and maintenance and upkeep and stuff like that, and to take an active role in taking care of those things without being, because her ultimately, her heart behind that is that she has always wanted to maintain a lot of distance from being what she calls a nagging wife. And she didn't want to feel like she was nagging by having to tell me, an adult, to take the garbage out. So all of that kind of gets unraveled now by the conversation of just like, hey, here's what I expect that you to do.
Yep.
And so, we had a little tiff about it, but, all in all, our first couple years of marriage were just so great. I mean, I'm serious. They were, I feel really grateful for that because life was, I don't know. I look back on it and I'm like, I know we were really, really stressed. And I know that felt like we had a lot on our plate. And we had it was hard financially. I was in seminary. She was making minimum wage as a veterinary technician. I was working construction, minimum wage, and in seminary. We lived in a small little apartment above a garage. And, we scraped by financially. We ate so much spaghetti and hamburger helper, that first year. Regular dinners over at the in-laws so that we didn't have to buy groceries. It was just hard. It was just really hard, but it was also really just a simple life.
Yeah.
No kids, no what I would call jobs of significant consequence. We both had jobs and they were important and we did a good job, but now Sherry's job is as a mom, that's pretty significant. And obviously I'm a pastor and I feel like that's pretty significant too.
Yep.
And so life is just much, much, much more complicated now. And I look back on it and I'm like, wow, the simplicity of what we had then was so beautiful. And I can't say that I would go back and not have what we have now, but it's just life changes so quickly and perspective changed so quickly. and what's important changes so quickly, and what you think is important one day, in the next won't be. And there's just a beauty in doing life like that together with someone else.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful for it. But I do remember, I think it was hard back then.
Yeah.
But not in comparison to what we are doing now.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, I think every stage
presents its own challenges.
Right.
And yeah. And, each generation has their own, I feel like stereotypes and patterns to kind of overcome.
Yep.
Right. I was actually, it was interesting. I was talking with one of my brothers the other day, and he pointed out, and it's something I also have pretty low tolerance for, is the kind of, what do you call it? Ragging on one's spouse, behind their back, and kind of the old ball and chain, she's just, whatever. He was just I've got zero tolerance for it. I was yeah, me too. You want to get me kind of frustrated and angry, start talking like that, and you'll find our conversation stops pretty quick, because I'm just not going to tolerate it. And I think that's maybe an older generations above me, that's kind of a pattern, but the younger generation, my generation's got more, has kind of different unhealthy stereotypes that kind of get made fun of, right? They always show up in comedy, but they can be true, right?
They're caricatures.
They're caricatures.
So there's truth. There is truth there, but the truth gets magnified to become negative.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
There was this reel that was going around, and it was essentially, the wife was the husband's oh, I'm married to my wife, and that means, and then she would interrupt him, and she would so essentially anytime the husband would go to say something in this joke, would kind of interrupt him, and the wife's opinion kind of ruled. And it was really interesting to see all the comments, because some people were haha, that's so true, that's exactly how me and my husband are. And then other people this is exactly how me and my wife are, and it's killing me.
Right.
It's this oh, this is just how it is, and it's just kind of funny, but then, oh no, that's not actually helpful. Just because it's the reverse of what's maybe happened traditionally or historically doesn't mean it's good either.
Right.
Right.
So. I agree. I think that there's cultural ways that people perceive or caricaturize the husband, and how they caricaturize the wife, culture, pop culture, or whatever. And there's obviously there's examples on the spectrum of those being true. It's you see it as the knucklehead husband who's dumb and stupid.
Homer Simpson.
Yeah, can't get anything right.
King of the Hill.
Yeah, and then you see on the other side, it's the nagging wife, and she's always on her husband's case. And
right. Everybody loves Raymond.
Yes. Right.
Yep.
And I think that's not honoring to, it's just an unhonoring position to be in, to kind of abide by or uphold those caricaturizations as being true.
Yeah.
Outside of your willingness to, if they exist in your life or in your marriage, to communicate them to your spouse so that you can work through it, because can guys be boneheads? Homer Simpson, of course they can.
Sure.
Can wives be nagging and everyone loves Raymond? Wife, yes, of course they can. but we all have the capacity and the tendency to do those things and to be like that. But telling everyone that my wife is nagging or telling everyone that my husband is an idiot is not going to solve the problem.
No.
It's just going to make it it's actually just going to make it worse.
Right. Because then we create a narrative for the other person to continue to live in. Right.
And it's just dishonoring as well. It doesn't honor the person as your partner.
Yeah.
As like Paul says in Ephesians chapter 5 that like you husbands love your wives like you love your own bodies. Like they are part of you. You are part of them. Like cannot be separated from one another. The two shall become one flesh. So anything that you wouldn't want to be said about you or you wouldn't say about yourself, right?
Right.
Be careful about how we say that about our spouses.
Yeah.
So, I could really talk about marriage a lot.
Yeah.
I feel like all day.
I was going to kind of ask you, I was like, do you feel like, we kind of talked about some cultural stereotypes. What do you feel like Christian stereotypes? Like, do you feel like there are ways in which Christians have talked about or portrayed or simplified marriage in a characterized way that's unhelpful?
Yes. I think that there has been an overemphasis in the Christian culture, an overemphasis on wives submitting to husbands, and an underemphasis on submitting to one another out of reverence for the Lord, which is the issue, I think, is that the Bible does talk clearly about wives submitting to husbands, and that our culture has an understanding of what submission means.
Right.
And our general understanding of what that means is less than, not as important as, unworthy of.
Yeah.
That's not a biblical understanding of submission, which is more about a willful position that a person takes. It really came out of a military term. It was a willful volunteerism, so to speak, of the position that one took in relationship to one another, in relationship to another. But it's been used in a way to denote worth rather than role.
Yeah.
So I think that's a caricaturization maybe I should finish all those thoughts. Is like, and so it can sometimes come. It can sometimes come to the point where Christian husbands don't believe that they have to listen to their wives or shouldn't listen. That there's not wisdom in listening to their wives.
Right.
That there's not any place for them to.
Because then they just say, well, you're not submitting to me by not just letting me make the decision I want.
Correct.
Right.
They're misunderstanding, which is they're misunderstanding how their submission to Christ affects how they show up in their marriage. And so I think that's one, is the whole idea of mutually submitting, of sacrificing and serving the other. What else would I say that I don't know. I think that's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever really thought about it too much.
Yeah.
But I think it's a question that I should think about more.
I think the one for me, one of the things is that this was something I discovered in previous relationships prior to meeting my wife was I was trying to figure out like some relationship dynamics that were happening in some of my dating relationships. And I ran across, because I remember my parents reading the book and it being talked about, like that book, Love and Respect, right? This idea that, men need respect, women need love. Mm-hmm. And I read it and I felt so disoriented as I read it because I primarily identified with what they considered to be feminine needs. It's like, no, I actually feel like I lack and need more of what they classically say the woman wants and needs out of a relationship versus what the man wants. And it's specifically like it's a Christian, like Christian authors, Christian like ministry and book. And I've talked with other people too who have also been like, yeah, sometimes it's like the man feels like he needs respect and honor or whatever. Like it's a need, but it's not exclusive to the man or even necessarily the predominant one.
Right.
And so I think
as a universal quality.
And so I was like, no, like there's sometimes that's the dynamic, right? Because they were kind of playing into this, like what felt like this stereotypical, the wife always wants closeness and affection and the husband always wants respect. And I was just like, no, I don't think that that's necessarily always true. I don't think that's like, sometimes that's maybe the dynamic, but
I kind of want both.
Right. And it's not really a prioritization of the other.
Yeah, and I'm assuming my wife doesn't want me to disrespect her.
No.
I'm sure she wants respect as well.
Right. Yeah, and then like other things about like the 5 love languages as being like an oversimplified formula for like affection and care. Or like one that I was really kind of passionate about when I was single, was just that like, treating marriage as this like peak Christian maturity thing. Like you're not going to be a mature Christian until you get married, and kind of it's overemphasis.
Yeah, or it is the goal of every Christian individual to get married.
And so some of those are the things that kind of like come to my mind in that like, where we kind of take some of the stereotypes of the world and we kind of sprinkle Christian fairy dust on them, and then we make them worse by like making them sacrosanct. Yeah. So
I agree. As you were talking before, you said the 5 love languages. It come to my mind being like, man, I remember. I don't hear as much about them anymore.
Yeah,
but I remember when I was in like high school and college, that was like the way in which you determined who your mate was going to be was what of the 5 love languages do they identify with. And like it almost became canonical in a Christian circle to understand the 5 love languages clearly. And it's not that they're wrong. It's not that they're bad. It's just that it's a very myopic view of what it means to give and receive love.
Yeah.
And what I've found is like, if I had to, if someone were to ask me what my love language was when I was first married or when I was in college or something like that, I would have had one answer. If it's like, what is it now? 20 years later, it'd be different for sure. Very different.
Yep.
And so I think those things do, even those types of things can change over time. Yeah. You want to say anything else today?
No, I think we've given people enough to think about.
Okay. Like I said at the beginning of the podcast, we have a marriage conference coming up in October. Love for you to take part in it if you're engaged or married. If you have any questions, perspectives about marriage, like us maybe to talk about in future episodes of the podcast, we'd love to hear those. Love to take a swing at them.
Yep.
So if you're a member of Conduit, or maybe if you're not a member of Conduit, maybe you watch services online or anything like that. We have a sermon series coming up in, I think, 3 weeks from now.
Yep.
Called Asking for a Friend, which is basically a sermon series that is made up of your questions that you have, whether that would be about faith or a certain scripture or something like that. So you can ask them by texting them to our line here, our podcast line, 716-201-0507. 0507. And we will add those to the list. And those that we don't get to on a Sunday morning, we may try to hit here, or may try to hit on Wednesday evening Bible study, or we'll see what kind of questions we get. And I'm not promising anyone that we're going to deal with
all of your questions,
every question that everyone asks in some environment.
Yeah.
Not going to do that. Not going to make that promise, but send us over some questions and see. Let's see what we can put together for some sermons coming up. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next one.